a lot to learn, not just from what she's saying, but also how she's presenting. And whatever is lost in terms of accent or English translation, don't worry, we'll make it up at the end when we ask questions. And she's super easy, she's super nice. And she'll make it as simple as possible. So don't feel nervous to ask questions, or even in between, type in the chat that you didn't understand something she was saying. And because the accent might be different, because we come from the South, and the Southern drawl is very different for many people listening to it for the first time. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to whichever kids are leading this, and then Valerie. We're super happy you're here. We're super happy you're here. All
Thank
right,
you.
let's begin, please, Farah.
Requesting Pratiksha to please begin the introduction.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Valerie ma'am is a graduate of the Universities of South Carolina. She completed her master's degree in social work with an emphasis on service management. She received her BA from Columbia College. She currently is employed with Low Country Preparatory School, the same school that we have partnered with for our new initiative, Do Speak. We are so excited for all great work we are doing together. We are very excited about our partnership. We are so grateful for all the wonderful opportunities we received. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I will first have to say, when I used to be doing public speaking in North Carolina and South Carolina, it was not in the virtual world. It would, of course, be in a room, a very large room in some cases, or very small crowds with students in classrooms. So you'll have to forgive me if the virtual world doesn't work the way that I want it to, but we'll try. We'll try on my end. Can you see my PowerPoint? Okay, just wanted to make sure that part's working before we get started. Again, thank you so much for having me. I know it's the evening there in India, so I appreciate you logging in and stopping what you're doing for just a few moments and listening about an American tradition called Thanksgiving. So let's get started. This is my family. I think anytime a guest speaker approaches a crowd, I think the crowd would like to know a little bit about who I am. So not only am I a graduate and have a master's degree in social work, I'm also a mom and a wife. And I think those duties are probably the most important thing beyond anything I do in this world. So as Freya stated early, she and I have been friends for over 20 years, and we met in service and serving our community. And I hope and pray that because we've met in service, our hearts will always be connected. So with this, you'll see my husband is Mike, and my little boy is 11. His name is Noah. And then we have a dog. Her name is Luna. And she's 1 year old and a big fur ball, as you can see, very fluffy. And Freya's got to meet Luna recently. I'm not sure if you have service dogs in your community, but Luna is going through training to become a school therapy dog. So I will have permission, once she is certified, to bring her to Low Country Preparatory School to provide assistance for children that may have anxiety or may have depression, or maybe even the very little ones are having trouble reading. She may sit with them and they would read a book for practice to the dog, because guess what? A dog doesn't speak back. A dog doesn't make fun of a little child that is having trouble or struggling reading. So it's a nice way of letting children practice skills. Maybe they're having a difficult time, and that's called a therapy dog. So we're really excited that she joined our family, and we have a lot of work to do for her certification. So let's get started. I have a small movie that I would love to show you about the history of Thanksgiving. And I do not know how to get rid of ads.
Is tuition free online and in person.
In North America, you'll notice the leaves are changing color. Pumpkin spice lattes are back, and Charlie Brown is playing on TV. That must mean it's time for Thanksgiving, with family, friends, and loads of turkey. Even if you're not an American, you've probably heard of the holiday. But the image of pacifist settlers singing Kumbaya alongside the natives is all wrong. The story begins on a cold pier in England in August of 1620, when 120 men, women, and children stepped onto two English merchant ships in Southampton Harbor, bound for the Americas. Both vessels seemed to be held together by spit and prayers. The Speedwell was so old it had fought against the Spanish Armada in 1588, and the Mayflower was such an ungainly transport ship that it could barely sail into the wind. And since the North Atlantic in the fall and winter is nothing but westerly winds, it was the absolute worst ship to try and attempt a crossing with. But somehow the Mayflower had made it to the Americas twice before, even if it had taken twice as long as normal. Luckily, these would-be colonists were determined. They had to be. They were Brownists, religious dissenters from the Anglican Church of England. You see, the Brownist beliefs were relatively simple. The first, that only the word of the Holy Bible was infallible. The second, that individual churches and their local communities should have more say and autonomy in the goings-on of the church. Both these beliefs were aimed at jettisoning the corrupt power structure of the old Catholicism. That didn't happen. As the new church started looking more Catholic by the day, the Brownists bought themselves a printing press and began passing out leaflets that opposed it, which led to the Brownists becoming intimately familiar with the inside of London's prison system. They got such a bad rap that Shakespeare even mentions them in one of his plays, Twelfth Night, where he says, "I had as gladly be a Brownist as a politician." Not exactly a flattering comparison. So the Pilgrims decided to risk it all as a startup colony in the Americas, creaky boat and all. It would be an English colony, but one not bound by religious politics. So they set sail and braved the rough fall seas in August of 1620. They hadn't even made it out of the port, though, before they found that the Speedwell was taking on water. So they pulled over at Dartmouth for repairs. Undaunted, they shored the leaking boards and set out again to a new life, and watched with glee as Land's End and Cornwall slipped away behind them, only to turn around and immediately see it again. The Speedwell had recently been refitted with a larger mast, and somebody had clearly botched the job. The ship was going nowhere. So 20 people agreed to stay behind and bring more of their congregation with them the next year, and 102 crammed onto the already overloaded Mayflower, finally leaving again on the 6th of September. Maybe it was the 16th. No one's actually sure. The calendars in that period are a bit wonky. Their trip was mercifully dull after recent events. But halfway across the ocean, the Pilgrims' good luck set back in again.
B&H, how can I help you?
I knew how to
B&H
stop
is
the
here.
ads.
From our house to yours, as your collab.
That's okay, don't worry.
Storm and strong winds hit. In the middle of the storm, a deep snap echoed through the ship. A main beam had cracked. So they pulled a spare from the hold and tried to reinforce it. But the buckling was so severe that it wouldn't stay in place. That meant it was time to turn around and go back to England again. The delays had already exhausted all the Pilgrims' money, and for them, that wasn't an option. So they decided to try something else first. They had brought a great iron screw with them as cargo, likely a piece of the exact printing press that had gotten them kicked out of England in the first place, and used that to raise the new beam into place. Somehow, it held long enough to get them across the Atlantic. They sighted land on 9th November, just off Cape Cod, then turned south for the Hudson River Valley. hoping to move closer to established colonies and warm weather. But hard winter currents forced them back to Massachusetts, where they set up anchor in the natural harbor of Provincetown. Knowing that their previous claim on this new land had been dodgy at best, the settlers agreed to draw up a new contract for their colony, styling it the Mayflower Compact. It organized them as a civil body politic created for the general good of the colony, where issues would be decided by vote. This set of rules and beliefs set down by the Pilgrims has since been called the world's first written constitution. The men of the ship put their names to paper, and they all signed the agreement together. And within weeks, they would all begin dying together. Scurvy and illness took hold of the boat, and as the first snows arrived, it turned the ship into an icy tomb. Exploration parties were sent out to find a suitable place to build, and any man who could still stand was put aboard with swords, armor, and matchlocks. They found a deserted landscape and found themselves strangers in an unknown land, filled with native burials and abandoned villages. But everywhere they went, eyes watched them. Going as far as they could each day, they camped on the shores, and in the dim morning, they draped their jackets over a barricade to dry and made to move their boats back into the water. And that's when the arrows began to rain down on them. Grabbing muskets, they fired blindly into the forest. Their leader appeared from behind a tree and fired 3 arrows directly at the Pilgrims. The man gave a triumphant cry and then disappeared again into the forest. The Pilgrims searched the area but found no bodies. Only 18 arrows, tipped with deer horn, brass, and eagle's claws. When they went to retrieve their jackets, they found them riddled with arrow holes. Guessing that as many as 30 or 40 men waited for them in the forest, the Pilgrims left before they could return. The next day, they found the building place they were looking for, well suited to winter construction, already cleared of timber, with tall hills for defensive positions. But it was also full of dead bodies. Pawtuxet had been a village of the Wampanoag people until it had been wiped out by an outbreak of Indian fever 3 years earlier. The epidemic was bad enough that the colonists found unburied skeletons still inside their homes. But with more settlers dying by the second, the Pilgrims were in no shape to be picky. They moved the Mayflower to join them and began construction. The first common house that was finished became a hospital for the ill. And the 19 families then each built their own town, huddled together for defense. And by February, the settlement was complete. But without food or proper shelter, they continued to die off one by one by one. And by the time the snows thawed, only 47 of the original 102 Pilgrims were still alive. And half of the Mayflower crew had died as well. Those that survived now faced the danger of summer raiding parties. So they decided to fortify the village, bringing cannons from the ship to point outwards into the unknown wilds. Finally free of the bitter cold, they planted corn taken from the abandoned graves and storehouses of the old Wampanoag village. And with that first thaw came their first contact with the locals. A man, tall and dark-skinned, boldly strode out of the forest and made to walk directly into the center of their town. The Pilgrims stopped him, guns pointed. Then he opened his mouth and greeted them in English, welcoming them to the new land, and then promptly asked for a beer to drink. He was Samoset of the eastern Abenaki, who'd spent years trading tales and supplies with English fishermen who passed through the area. And as he swapped stories over his acquired taste for English delicacies, he warned that not every tribe would be as friendly as his, but they could get little more out of him as his English was broken at best. The next week, Samoset returned with a new man, Tisquantum, known today as Squanto, who spoke fluent English. He was the last survivor of the Pawtuxet tribe, the very land the Pilgrims now inhabited, who had been taken by slavers as a boy and had lived in Spain and England before escaping back home again, only to find his own people had been wiped out by disease. He had been taken captive, a useful tool to deal with the continuing English encroachment. Squanto heralded the arrival of 60 armed warriors and their chief, the Wampanoag. The Pilgrims grabbed their muskets and ran to the walls and waited for the worst. But neither side wanted to make the first move. With a bit of back and forth from Squanto, their chief, Massasoit, agreed to sit down with the Pilgrims' governor, and after a healthy amount of liquor to loosen up both sides, they set about with the business of peace. See, the Wampanoag found themselves beset on all sides by enemy tribes, with plenty of land, but no power to hold them back. Where others saw the English settlers as a threat, Massasoit saw an opportunity.
Show me the one whose safety deemed such destruction.
The Pilgrims agreed to help the chief against his enemies by using their muskets and cannons, in return for mutual protection, and some much needed agricultural advice from Squanto, specifically how to plant the native foods that the Pilgrims had never before encountered. And so began an unlikely friendship, where Squanto passed on his knowledge of the land. Under his tutelage, the Pilgrims learned how to plant corn, bean, and squash in a way that ensured that each would thrive. When they weren't planting, they sent diplomatic parties out to every tribe in a 50-mile radius to agree to mutual peace, and took time to knock the heads of anyone who threatened their native allies. So by the time the fall came and the harvest ready to be brought in, they found themselves looking quite optimistically to the new year, especially in comparison to the last. It was in this spirit that the men were sent into the forest to shoot a few game birds, likely turkeys and waterfowl, for a feast to give thanks to the Lord for their bounty and good luck. Massasoit joined them with 90 of his people and brought along 5 deer for the occasion. Add to that a few eels, some fish, crabs, and a lobster or two, and of course their freshly harvested corns, beans, and squash, and you got yourself the first Thanksgiving dinner. It was a celebration that lasted for 3 days, a harvest festival of sport, games, and friends, like so many others around the world. Days of Thanksgiving, thankful that there will be enough food to eat, and another year survived. Sure, the new land wasn't perfect. It wasn't harmony between man and beast, or a permanent peace between settler and native. But for a time, people set aside their differences and gave their thanks for a chance at life. And many other harvest festivals appear around the world today for just the same thing. And that's the story of the first Thanksgiving.
So I'm not sure of the history that you've been taught about the American Thanksgiving culture. And of course, you hear Luna in the background. I apologize. But the real story of Thanksgiving is a bit brutal. Men and women and children came, across the ocean and took over the land of our American natives and fought and killed. And I remember as a young child, we were taught to put your hand on construction paper and to draw a turkey with a magic marker. And then that was our sweet little hand turkey that we got to take home to put on our wall, and our parents were so excited that we made a craft. And I remember the teachers in elementary school in 3rd, 4th grade talking about the Pilgrims and how loving and caring the American Indians and the new Americans work together to harvest and to bring a meal to the table. So not until much later in life did I realize the true meaning of Thanksgiving, yes, is definitely to give thanks for that harvest, but that the history was so violent in getting them to the same table. So I wanted to share with you some of that background, so you know how the American tradition truly started. So today, a few of our Thanksgiving traditions incorporate some of the items on our screen. It incorporates a very large gathering with family for a meal. And normally in the United States, we celebrate it at lunch and or at dinner. And one of the amazing feats of Thanksgiving, it's always the 4th Thursday of November. And extended families travel all across the United States to be with their families for Thanksgiving. We have so many holidays in the United States. Thanksgiving has the record for the highest travel date. So there are more cars on the highways, there are more trains, more buses traveling, and more people are in airlines getting across states to their families. When we do gather, we typically play games. There's always storytelling in my family because remember, cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents are all together under one roof, maybe for the first time that year. So everyone's expressing and sharing and catching each other up with stories. And we always end, in our family, we always end with a great family photo where the entire clan gets together. We set up a tripod and we make sure that we have one large family photo that of everyone that attended our Thanksgiving holiday that year. A few traditions in America also incorporate the Macy's parade, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. And of course, football. And I don't know if you know what I mean when I say American football. I think you might know it more as soccer. But American football is an enormous Thanksgiving tradition here in America. We also, so many families, and I'm very thankful for this, volunteer that week. They volunteer in churches or faith synagogues. They volunteer in their community soup kitchens, is what we call that here in America, where a very large group of people would get together to cook and make the meal so that then they can feed the community in different cities across the United States. So volunteering has also become a tradition for Thanksgiving. And then something that we call in America Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So the Macy's parade, we turn on the parade on the television while we're cooking in the morning. And I wanted to share with you, and I'll certainly send this link so that you can look at these things later, but I wanted to share with you my menu for Thanksgiving. And then I put recipes for the links so that you can always come back to these later if you're interested. But this is a very Southern menu. We have roast turkey. We have cornbread dressing, which is a very Southern recipe. We have rice and gravy that we make. We have green beans. You heard in the movie of the traditional, they had squash and corn. We incorporate squash and corn into our Thanksgiving menu each year. We have cornbread. This is a type of bread that is very sweet to the taste. In the movie, you heard they mentioned pumpkins and squashes. We make pumpkin pie as a dessert. Pecan pie. Pecans are a nut that grow here in the South on these big, beautiful trees. And so we harvest the pecans and make pecan pie as a dessert. This is making me hungry. Is anybody hungry? We also have chocolate cakes, lots of different kinds of chocolate cakes and brownies, and cookies. And then another Southern tradition is our ambrosia. Ambrosia is a Greek term, but an ambrosia is every type of fruit that you have. You put all together, you chop and cut small and put all together in a large bowl, and we call that our fruit salad. And then last but not least is our cranberry. Many people do not realize that in the Native American tradition, the seasons start with the berries. And the seasons start in the spring with harvesting strawberries. Do you have strawberries in India? Okay. The season starts in an American Indian tradition with harvesting strawberries, and then they harvest squash and beans. And as the season, as the vegetables and the produce grow, they end their seasons with cranberries. So the cranberry was a traditional, we like to think, a Thanksgiving, a traditional Thanksgiving menu, because the harvest would have ended with gathering the cranberries. So this, if anyone's interested, you can click on those links when I send you this PowerPoint and see how we prepare these dishes. It typically takes all morning. We get up very early in the morning and cut and chop and mix and bake and spend time in the kitchen as a family and then sit down to eat together for lunch. So let's see. We have many, many cultures represented in the United States. And so the turkey may look different depending on if you're an Italian American or if you're from Greeks, or like me from Southern. So each dish would have a flavor or a little bit different spices to represent that particular family background. The Italians use provolone to put inside their turkey, and prosciutto, which are spicy meats. As Southerners, we put oranges inside our turkey. So it gives the flavor just something a little bit different, but that's based on our heritage. That's based on our culture. Let's see. So picture yourself, I want to just relate back to that movie, that short clip you saw. Picture yourself in the year of 1620. So the New World settlers, which are now referred to as the Pilgrims, and the Native Americans found peace by bringing a meal together and sitting around for 3 days celebrating their harvest. So we later coined it Thanksgiving, but it was celebration of the harvest is why they were gathering, and the celebration that they had survived the bitter winter and survived the fighting and the turmoil and the diseases. So they're gathering and they're sharing and they're being thankful and counting their blessings. So this is a beautiful moment, I think, in the relationship of building peace with one another. And when we say our Thanksgiving prayers, my family likes to incorporate a prayer of peace. And I hope in our world that everyone can pray for peace. So this is a very symbolic time in Americans' history. So Thanksgiving became an annual custom throughout New England in the 17th century, and it was not declared Thanksgiving until President George Washington in 1789 proclaimed that the Thanksgiving holiday would be celebrated throughout the land of the new Americas. So in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln declared it that the official holiday would always fall on the fourth Thursday of November. So this is one holiday that does not change. The date may change every calendar, but it's always the fourth Thursday, the very fourth Thursday of the month, no matter what. So now fast forward to the year 1924. We've gone from 1620 to 1924. And we're going to be in the city of New York, where the owner of Macy's, which is a very large department store in New York City, he is trying to incorporate Thanksgiving sales and to bring better revenue to his department store. Have you ever heard the term media frenzy? Does that translate? Media frenzy is a state or period of uncontrolled excitement and typically even brings wild behavior. And the term commercialized, have you ever heard of the word commercialized? That means it's designed for financial gain and it's profit oriented. So the lovely parade that the Americans glue themselves to our televisions and watch from beginning to end while we're cooking is a media frenzy tactic. Let me show you what I mean. Oh.
At K-12, I'm ready. K-12 is tuition free, online and in person.
Embodies the spirit of the holiday like Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. For 95 years, it's become a Thanksgiving Day staple.
1 million people line New York streets to see the annual Thanksgiving Day Parade.
It all began in 1924. The procession was just 2 blocks long and featured animals from the Central Park Zoo.
Interestingly enough, by 1927, they stopped with the zoo animals because they scared the children along the way.
It was originally known as the Christmas Parade, as a way for the nation's largest store to jumpstart the season of shopping.
Culminating with Santa Claus at the very end of the parade unveiling the holiday windows on 34th Street.
This was the earliest Santa balloon. In fact, Santa Claus has a strong connection to New York. In 1823, New Yorker Clement Clark Moore wrote about the white-haired, red-suited man in A Visit from St. Nicholas. You might know this poem by its more familiar title, The Night Before Christmas. Santa isn't the only star of the show. By 1927, the zoo animals were replaced by giant balloons. And at the end of that parade, the helium-filled balloons were released over Manhattan.
The thought was if we released them and there was a return to sender label on them, they would come back to Macy's.
Except instead of waiting for them to return to the ground, a student pilot named Annette Gibson tried to wrangle Felix the cat while it was floating. It got tangled in her biplane and crashed. Fortunately, both the pilot and co-pilot survived. Over the years, the balloons have thrilled children and adults alike.
With a series of enormous inflated figures representing famous historical and screen personalities.
The first balloons floated close to the ground. Even then, their enemy was the wind. Since then, they've gotten bigger and bigger. The only time the wind was way too strong to fly any balloons was 1971.
You consider how wide Central Park West is. Pretty wide compared to some American cities, but how wide the balloons are.
Some modern balloons reach 6 stories high and require more than 100 handlers. While balloons have been the stars, from the beginning, the workhorses have been the floats. Once just cloth covering a truck, floats have evolved into something more sensational.
You see something that is so quintessentially New York. You see the New York City streets. You see the crowds, the excitement, the marching bands. It is such a celebration of the season. New York is such an amplifier of great things. And certainly this parade is no exception.
From Felix the Cat to Tom Turkey to Santa Claus, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade embraces tradition. And tradition is what brings people together.
I love that shot, Steve. Don't you? And by the way, we're sitting for which kill?
So media frenzy galore. But it's something that is so ingrained in the United States now, thanks to Macy's, thanks to a department store. So this is something that I think is a bit odd, but the United States of America loves to watch the Thanksgiving parade at Macy's. Another tradition I mentioned earlier is college football. And college football, teams across the United States play their rival teams on Thanksgiving weekend. That's the most important game of their entire season. College football the Association of College Football just decided to copy basically what the parade was trying to do. The parade was drawing so much attention. So many people would travel to New York to line the streets to watch the parade. So the College Football Association, a very aha moment. We can too. They became televised all across the United States. And then large companies like Nike and Adidas and Coke and McDonald's and anything that you can think of became sponsors for this on television. So that brought even more revenue to college sports. And you can see in 2018, college football brought in $240 billion. That is an incredible amount of money that comes to the colleges. Based on television. So on Thanksgiving afternoon, football starts, and boy, everyone is glued to their TV screens again. Now I'm going to speed this one up just to give you a glimpse of some college football.
In 2010, Spurrier and the Gamecocks made more history against the Gators. This time, it was true freshman running back Marcus Lattimore who gashed Florida for 212 yards and 3 touchdowns on 40 carries. It was South Carolina's first ever win over Florida in Gainesville, snapping an 0-for-12 streak. And more importantly, it clinched the SEC East, sending the Gamecocks to the SEC championship game for the first time in school history.
I'm a Gamecock. That was my university, the University of South Carolina. So I had to put a little clip of my favorite football team in for you to see. I mentioned earlier the evil, in my opinion, but boy, does it ever bring revenue to our economy. The term Black Friday was actually coined in 1952. And if you think of accounting, if you're thinking of counting your money at the end of the day when you're closing the store, if your figures in the accounting world are black, that means you have a positive number. If your figures are in the red in accounting, that means you have a negative number, which means you lost money. So this term was coined Black Friday because, as you can see, everything sells out. If they put 100 TVs on the floor for sale, all 100 are snatched before you can blink. If they put 200 toasters on the floor in Walmart, 200 toasters are bought immediately. So there's a lot of excitement for Black Friday. And there are many, many sales throughout the United States. Friaz is probably smiling. Cyber Monday was then invented. And those that do not like to go shopping, which I do not like to go shopping on Black Friday, the crowds, the lines, the waiting, the anger that people have if they've sold something that they wanted and they didn't get there in time to buy it is not something that I want to be part of. So I stay home on Black Friday, but I turn to Cyber Monday. So Thanksgiving is on Thursday. Black Friday follows shopping days. The whole weekend is shopping. And now we are Monday. Monday is now coined in the United States in November of Thanksgiving as Cyber Monday. So you sit at home or you go to work and you sit at work in front of your computer and you shop. You're shopping for the Christmas holiday. And like the sign says, Cyber Monday is safe. You're in the comfort of your home or you're sitting at work and you're doing your shopping. You're safer. However, the U.S. businesses have seen a tremendous number in productivity dwindling. Instead of working, people are shopping. You're supposed to be waiting on tables, or maybe you're answering phone calls at your job. Instead, you're shopping for the bike that your child wants, or you're shopping for that sweater that you're going to give to your mom. You should be working, but Americans are shopping on Cyber Monday. Cyber Monday, last year in 2019, total sales for Cyber Monday was $9.4 billion. One day, $9.4 billion. I think Americans have figured out a way to increase revenue. What do you think? So in my family, my aunts, some of my uncles, some cousins, they all leave the house and they go shopping. And some of my family stays behind, and we play games and we watch movies. So sometimes we split and go our separate ways after we've just had that great big meal. My immediate family, we talk about what can we do? How can we call you to action? What is a cause that means something to you personally or to your family? I have many, 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 many nonprofits that I am connected to in our community. I grew up with a family that took us to the soup kitchens to serve those meals. I remember being 5 years old and handing biscuits to people in line, bread to people in line. So we would always have our family meal, and then we would leave and go to church and help passing the food out to those in need. So this is one example that I like to tell my students. Even if you do not have a car, even if you do not have a way of leaving your home, if you have a pencil and a piece of paper, you can volunteer. You can volunteer in this example by writing a letter of thanks, writing a letter of a blessing to a military man or woman. We, of course, have the military stationed in all parts of the world, and certainly they miss their families. They are sacrificing and to protect each one of us in America. And so this is just an example of how to volunteer with not ever having to leave your home. We have many, many, many organizations just like you do in your community where you could give thanks and give back. And that's how my family likes to call or end our Thanksgiving gathering. I'd like to remind everyone, and I know that you hear this from Ms. Frias, is to remember our lives get very busy. Our lives we get consumed in our needs and sometimes even our wants. But I always want to remind my students here in America to just slow down and to stop, to pause, and to give thanks. Now, the picture here on your screen is our thankful tree. Put this up in my door at home the very 1st of November. And every day we write a blessing or a thankful message on the leaves. So by the end of November, we have a beautiful tree covered in blessings, covered with those leaves. It's a symbolic way of allowing my husband and my son and myself to slow down and to be thankful, not only in the month of November, but for every day of the year. So I would be happy to answer your questions. You have to remember, I am not a historian, but I will do my very best. And I thank you for having me today.
Valerie, would it be okay to have you stop sharing screen so we can all be in the same classroom?
Absolutely. Let me get my mouse working. Stop share.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Does anybody have questions? Because look how many I've written down.
Oh, goodness.
Does anybody have questions? So I think a lot in the videos, because of the accent, may not have come across. So I
Yes.
have a few questions. Yeah, now Pratiksha will nod her head, but she won't say it when I ask her. All right, so I've written a few things down. What was the Mayflower? What was the Mayflower, please?
The Mayflower was a vessel, a small ship, a wooden ship that the 120 passengers from England traveled over the seas. The
So
Mayflower is a very small wooden ship.
So 120 people from England, which we now call United Kingdom.
Correct.
So 120 people from United Kingdom got into this little wooden boat and tried to come over to America.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. What did they mean when they said the old power of Catholicism? Isha, can you type that into the chat, please? Old power of Catholicism. Do you know?
I believe the old power was the king. The king wanted to be all powerful. And even though the king was giving the blessing to go search for new land, he did not want new religion.
Okay. Okay. So they wanted to leave England and come to America because the king wanted to conquer or take on new land. Right. But he didn't want to let go of his religion. He wanted to take that religion also in whichever land they conquered. So then what was a Brownist?
A Brownist was the 120 that boarded the Mayflower. They wanted to seek new opportunities and wanted to seek new religion. They wanted to separate themselves from the king.
Understood what was happening? So the king wanted new land, but he didn't want to give up his religion. The Brownists didn't want to prescribe to the religion that the king wanted them to. So they went in search of land where they didn't have to just practice the religion the king wanted them to. Understood what's happening so far? Okay. There was a phrase, an English phrase used in the video saying they got familiar with the inside of a prison. What does that phrase mean, to get familiar with and then inside a prison?
Yes, in England or the United Kingdom, if they were trying to practice a separate religion, a different religion, they would be arrested and put behind bars in prison. And these settlers, these Brownists, were, Friaz, what's the word for protesting? Yeah. Protesting. They were protesting against the king. They were protesting, I don't know if, do you remember they said they built a press, a printing press?
Right.
And they wrote news articles, or what we would call a newspaper. They wrote news articles about the religion that they wanted more people to join, and so they were often put in prison. And they became that's what the phrase means. They became very familiar with being in prison because of their religion.
Understood what's happening. They're protesting. They're trying to get other people to understand. So they've now trying to write, print publications to tell other people about what the king is trying to do. So of course, the king being in charge is the one who's getting them arrested, getting them put in prison. Now they want to leave. So they get into this little boat that is supposed to take them across, and they fall sick on the boat, right? Because so many of them crammed into that little boat, and they got something called scurvy. 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 Val, what is scurvy and how dangerous is it?
Scurvy is a disease. It's a lack of vitamin C. It's a lack of proper nutrition. So on the boat, they had bread, very little bread and a little water. And they were on this very small boat for more than 66 days it took to cross the ocean. Remember, the boat was in terrible shape. And then it had terrible problems. The very large mast that sails the boat fell twice. They had to make repairs, and the repairs were not done well or not done correctly. And so they were all crammed under the ship, or inside the ship, I guess I should say, together, packed very tightly together. And without proper nutrition. So when you do not have proper nutrition, you can become very, very ill in the 17th century with a disease called scurvy.
Thank you, Val. So did I understand the video correctly? At some point when the first ship sort of broke down, they went back to England.
Yes.
And then so they tried once to escape, but the boat broke down. The water started coming into the boat. And so they went back to England, where they were kicked out, that you wanted to leave, now leave. You're not welcome back. So they tried and they left again, right? Yes. And that's when, even though they had more problems, they still ended up reaching the land, Americas. And was called Americas, plural at that time, because South America, North America were not split. It was all just one land. Am I correct about this, Valerie?
Correct.
Yes. Okay. So, so that's what it was. Why were they called pilgrims?
Pilgrims was coined, in the 18th century, pilgrims was coined because pilgrims means wonder. Bless you.
Thank you.
Pilgrims means you wander. Does that translate?
Bhatakna, idhar udhar, bhatakna. Okay. You go here, you go there. So they were going here and there only.
Exactly. You go where the winds take you. The winds take a pilgrim on an adventure, on a journey. And so they were coined pilgrims much later in our history.
And how cool is this, that since it was 1620, they had arrows made out of deer horn. You know, deer, what is deer in Hindi? Oh, you know what deers are. Tanu, what is a deer? Sorry? Hiran. That's right. That's right. So it was made out of deer horn, glass, and eagle's nails. Imagine, that's
claws.
How they used to make claws. That's how they used to make their weaponry in 1620 or the 17th century. One second, please. I'm just reading my notes. Okay. So when all was said and done, when they finally got off at the Americas, they started building these settlements. Means they started building their homes. They started building kind of their farms. So 110, remember 120 got in the boat. 110. So by the time they finished building their homes, only 47 had survived.
Right.
Sort of like our leadership program. Only that many survived.
Right.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Think about that first winter. They arrived to Americas in the winter. They were not prepared for the winter, the cold. They did not have home to go to. They did not have shelter. So they had to remain on the Mayflower days and nights and weeks, while the men would go to shore in tiny rowboats to build. So the women and the children stayed on the boat for months. and even became sick, again, because of the harsh winter.
So understanding what she's saying, they had no home when they got there, and they didn't understand how cold it was going to be in wherever they ended up in the Americas. So their families had to continue living on that small little boat while they got in a chotu boat and went over to the land, continued building the homes, and they built something called the common house, is what I heard in the video.
Yes.
So they built like a common house first. And then I guess the families could come off the boat, they could kind of live there. But on the land already, there were Native Americans. So a Native American is someone who hadn't immigrated there, means they didn't come from another land and come to America. They were already living there. Now, how they got there, none of us were alive, we don't know. But they were already living there. They were already living there. That's why they were called Native Americans. And they had these various tribes. I'm referring my notes and saying. So they had these various tribes, right? And they could have been unwelcoming, they could have been rude, they could have, exactly like the king wanted to kick them out from England, the Native Americans could have wanted to kick them out from the Americas, and they were weak, they were small in number. If they wanted to do that, they could have done that. Instead, there was a Native American who befriended them, right? Some name with an S, I didn't pick that up. There was a Native American. Say that one more time, love.
Squash.
Squash. How do I spell that?
I do not know.
Okay. So,
I'll look it up.
no, we'll look it up.
Don't know.
So basically, he befriended them, right? So he tried to become and he even said in that video that everyone may not be as friendly as me. Right? He said that. So think about it in a Pehchaan context. One person decided to bridge this side and this side, because everybody on this side didn't want to be friends with everybody on this side. Everybody on this side didn't want this side to be part of their world. So one person stood in between the bridge and tried to make the connect happen. Sounds familiar? Right? So that's kind of what was happening over there. And what's a musket? Anybody know what's a musket? So there are weapons. There were weapons that were used in, no. A musket, Pratiksha, was a type of gun, but a very older version of one. It's not a sword. I think what you're trying to think of is a sword. And so that's why they said, right? They came about the business of peace. This guy, this squash that Valerie's talking about, he came about the business of peace, and he formed an unlikely friendship. Someone wouldn't have thought they would have become friends. And so then I guess to live, they all had to start planting, and they all had to start growing crops. And so when that harvest means, they know harvest means. Tanu, harvest means?
Like
Take a guess.
how the wheat, we harvest wheat.
That's right. When the crop finishes growing and you cut it, right? You take it. So then to celebrate their friendship, to celebrate the survival of this really difficult time that everybody had been through and building these relationships, they sat down to have a meal together. Right? They sat down to have a meal together, because what bonds people faster than eating food? And so they sat down to eat a meal together. And traditionally, now, so many years later, families sit down to eat together, but they eat the traditional food that can be harvested in winter. Like Valerie said, the squash, which is like dudhi, cranberries, things like that. Understood? Isn't it a cool holiday? And what they gave thanks for was obviously that they survived, that they made new friends, that they found a new home. They could celebrate and practice whatever religion they wanted to. They had so much to give thanks for. So now families in America carry on that tradition and continue to give thanks for each other. Like Valerie would be thankful for her husband and her son. And so they give thanks for each other as well as whatever blessings they currently have in their lives. And they give back to those less fortunate than them. So I put in the chat 3 ideas that Valerie said that they do to serve or to give back on Thanksgiving, to say thank you. Is they serve food to people they don't know. They might write a thank you letter to somebody in the army or the navy. So they do things like that and focus on giving back the blessings they already have. Make sense? So cool. Now, of course, some people have found a way to make money from this super cool, super amazing holiday. And that's the other part she was trying to tell you about, right? Macy's Day Parade. Similarly happens in India, right? We want to celebrate Ganesh Chaturthi, but it ends up being about commercializing the holiday as opposed to actually celebrating the holiday for the spirit of what it is. And that's what our world has done. If you look at $9.6 billion in one day, in one day, right? I was trying to calculate on my calculator how much that would be. My calculator couldn't come up with a number. It came up with an error.
Error.
Yes. So I was trying to calculate in rupees how much that would be. And the calculator even can't calculate. So Valerie and I share a common set of values. So what we're trying to tell you is to keep things in perspective.
Yes.
Right? Those of you participating in the MS talks today, your topic, ironically, and I don't believe God works in irony, is festivals. Are you celebrating joy, or I forgot the third piece of it? Express, right? So expression. So basically, what are your thoughts about festivals, or what are your thoughts about holidays, if you said it in an American context or with American language? So isn't it ironic that today is the day Valerie came on to speak to us about Thanksgiving and about the spirit of the holiday? God doesn't work in coincidences. I mean, it was fully planned. So that's the gist of Thanksgiving. Now, what do you think? Now share your thoughts, because now I know you clearly understand.
Thank
Madhura,
you.
Madhura, that's why we make an amazing team. If the world could just see it, we'd be set. Madhura, kick off this conversation. What are your thoughts?
I'm on Thanksgiving.
On anything we've talked about today.
I watch a lot of series and they do celebrate Thanksgiving and they are so huge. Like the most common Friends, like in each and every season they celebrate Thanksgiving and Monica like prepares this huge feast. And now knowing now in this session when Valerie ma'am told about us the history, it just made a more we got a lot of background and understood why they celebrate, why it is so important to them. I just thought they just gather around because around this year, like in the whole year, they don't get time with their families. So thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing these valuable thoughts and knowledge with us. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Pratiksha, add what have you taken away today? Unmute, darling, unmute. Pratiksha, unmute, sweetheart.
Oh, sorry. So I was, as Madhura said, I also watch Friends, and this is all making too much sense today because we always have this Thanksgiving things, and we have always heard about it, but we never actually knew why it was celebrated. And I think not just Americans, in fact, the whole world should celebrate Thanksgiving with our families because that's what it is, right? We are thanking to each of our own parents and relatives and everyone because we are thankful to have them. I think we all should celebrate.
I love that plan. I think so does Valerie. Arushi?
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, the way the festivals, all of them boil down to celebrating something for the spirit of it and to bringing and the values. It was something which reflects globally. It was something, and how commercialized it has become, and how at least I should go back to what it actually is. It being Ganesh Chaturthi or Christmas or anything that I celebrate, it should be from heart and to give thanks. In fact, all the festivals that I do, because everything is just bringing us together, and it should be that. That is something I really loved about today's
Thanks,
session. Thank you,
Arushi.
ma'am.
Satya?
Hello. Valerie ma'am, thank you for all the lessons, first of all. Really learned a lot today. Am I audible, please?
Yes, you're echoing, but we can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
So what I learned that be it an American festival or an Indian festival, the main motto of the festivals are to bring people together from everywhere, and the next motto is to spread love and happiness. So even for Thanksgiving, like I knew about Thanksgiving because Fraz has told us many times about it. But the main gist of is why do we why do the Americans celebrate it? I really learned that today. So yes, thank you.
Great. Val, he was trying to say motto, motto, the main motto. Who do we have? Altaf, I want to hear you speak. Hi, Altaf. Altaf is new to me, Valerie. I'm just getting to know him in our classes. Altaf, let's hear what you have to say about today.
I really love it. About how to celebrate Indians and Americans people, and I also learn the way and how to appreciate and how to share everything about new things. Like I know in the American food's name, which was amazing for me. Thank you.
Great, Altaf. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Suvojit, you want to say something? You're looking at me with like all this. Suvojit, kuch
Yes,
naya seekha?
Yes, ma'am. All the reason bhaias told that about that festival of Christmas and here the Ganesh Chaturthi. I think it's a very big thing that in USA that Christmas parties like they're on the road and all that things. I like very much that of things, and I like also the football game which are there on that Thanksgiving day. Because I'm a sports player and I love sports. That's why I like that football sport which are playing in America.
Great, Suvojit. We love that. All right. Anyone else? 1 second. Somebody is saying something. Ayush is typing. Did they also have a written treaty or agreement between the Native Americans and the people who came from the UK? I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't know the answer either, but that's a great question.
So we can look that up and put it on our group, right, Keisha? We can look that up and put it on our group. That did they make a treaty, the Native Americans and the people who came over? We can look that up and then put it up. And then, yes, we agree by everybody. We all agree that Thanksgiving should be followed by the whole world, and we should invest time in our families. Yes. Anybody else have any other questions or anything that they would like to say?
May I add something?
Yes, we would love that. Please go ahead.
So the thing which I loved the most about Thanksgiving is there is a point that every family makes to come together and thank the moment that has happened the whole year. Then as Valerie ma'am said that she she does many social work, so she makes a point that she makes a point that she writes to the soldier and do other social work. So I think not just giving happiness to your family, but also giving happiness to other people as well, who are not able to celebrate the Thanksgiving due to some reason or other. So that's also I love the most about.
Thank you. Valerie, we are getting ready to go into a holiday in India called Diwali, right?
Yes.
Diwali, right? And so today, thanks to one of our trustees, Rashna Cooper, who's also on this call, she had the idea that we should do something to give back to those less fortunate over Diwali season, because this has been a particularly difficult year for many. So this year, this today itself, actually, all day, Satyam and Kajal have been doing a food distribution on our behalf to families. And so it's so perfect that we're speaking about service today. So they also got to be in service today. It's super easy for us to write the check. It's a lot more effort to plan the groceries, get them all put in a bag, make the lists, distribute them to the appropriate families, make sure that they are set. And so both of them have been in service all day today. And so it's perfect that we're speaking about being in service. So we should definitely follow Rashna's lead and do much more of this as an organization. So perfect. I think I'm done. I don't see any further comments or questions. Ayush has a question. Yes, Ayush, please say.
Yes, ma'am. Is American football is same as rugby game?
No, it's not. Mohammed already asked me that question. There are a few different rules in rugby than there are in American football. And even the ball itself is made up, it's a different composition than the American football ball, but it is very similar. It is very similar. So I can see why we can get confused between American football and rugby. Yes. But Ayush, amazing question. Amazing question. All right. Sheetal has written, but I think it's just a comment. All right. Perfect. Thank you, everybody. Do we have a vote of thanks, please?
Yes, ma'am. So, on behalf of all my peers here, this is my heartfelt thank you to you, Valerie, ma'am, for this very, very insightful session. Thank you for teaching us about the history of Thanksgiving and the lip smacking food that you prepare each year, and what the true spirit of Thanksgiving really is. It really taught us all in detail about the American Thanksgiving culture, and especially those of us who are going to be who are a part of Dosti. I'm sure this was a very insightful session. Thank you very much, Valerie, ma'am, and we look forward to hearing from you many more times in future.
Thank you all. It's so lovely to be here and to share a little bit of American history and traditions with you. And I would invite you to my table if you travel to South Carolina.
And we would take you up on that offer too. Thanks, Val. Thank you so much. Kish, we can stop the live. That's cool. Thank you, Val.